Good afternoon. Welcome to Heritage Christian Center. My name is Marlon Saunders, and I am the senior pastor here. We're so glad you could join us. We're hosting this event today because all of us here have two traits in common. We know the pain of America's gun violence epidemic, some of us in deeply personal and profound ways. We also share the faith that we can change this country for the better. The chorus we are joined by two of the gun safety movement's most compelling leaders. In a few moments, we will hear from someone who has led on this issue for a long time, for more than 15 years now. He cares deeply. When he was the mayor of New York City, he founded a national coalition of mayors, or a national coalition called Mayors Against Illegal Guns. Then after he left City Hall, he founded Everytown for gun safety, taking his leadership to an entirely new level. He is the original gun sense champion. Now he is seeking the Democratic nomination for presidency. And today, I am glad to announce that I endorse Mike Bloomberg for president. We'll hear from Mike. We will hear from Mike shortly, but first, it is my pleasure to introduce a gun violence survivor, a tremendous advocate on this issue, the state representative for District 37 here in Aurora. Please welcome Tom Sullivan.
Good afternoon. Last week, Mayor Bloomberg called me to tell me he was running for President of the United States and that he was coming to Colorado, and he hoped that we could find time to meet up. During our conversation, we talked about our mothers, the ages of our daughters, and Mike told me that during his time as mayor of New York, he had probably given between 300 to 400 eulogies at funerals for New York's finest. He told me he could not fathom having to give a eulogy for one of his own children, as I did for Alex. And he commented on my strength to do that. Someone who has that amount of empathy and compassion towards another should be reason enough to endorse them. We all know that those are two qualities greatly lacking in our society today, and ones that we could use more of. But I have witnessed the actions that Mike has taken since Alex was murdered, from his Mayors Against Illegal Guns and the formation of Everytown for gun safety. I am confident that survivors and victims of gun violence will have an ally in Mike in the White House, that he won't back down from the pressure of the gun lobby and the gun industry, and that he has prepared to enact a plan on day one to help reduce the health crisis in America that is gun violence. That's why today I want to endorse Mike Bloomberg's candidacy for the presidency and introduce to you my friend, Mike Bloomberg.
Tom, Pastor, thank you very much. I thought while I was just listening, maybe it'd be appropriate just to take a pause for 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and remember. I didn't lose anybody so far in my family for gun violence, and hopefully never will, but I certainly know a number of people who did, and well, I think all I can do is try to work to make a better world so that there'll be fewer people and there'll be less need for people to have red shirts and come like this. So if we just wait 1 minute, the press will wait. They have plenty of time. Thank you. I was just looking and wondering how many red shirts I have at home. Probably about a dozen. I used to take one each time after each event, and then I said, wait a second, that's not good use of the shirts. But they're in my closet, and I try to take the one every day when I run. I take the one from the bottom and I assume that when it gets washed, it gets put on the top. So I've cycled through all of them. So if I have one of your shirts, I do use it, actually. Anyways, it's an honor to speak with you today, and thank you all, excuse me, for being here, and particularly for braving the snow and the rain. I was wear a big jacket and have boots. So I brought a set of cowboy boots in my luggage, but I didn't take them out because they didn't have all the snow that you had promised me. It was a little bit. Tom and I just came from the memorial for the victims of the Aurora theater shooting, and I put some flowers down in the middle of the memorial, which is where his son is remembered. All of you have different places that you go to, but we all have the same thing in common. We've lost somebody, and we have to make sure that we build for the future so nobody else has to go through this. I just can't imagine the pain that one has if you lose a child. It's just unthinkable, and yet you've gone through it, and you have the strength and the courage, and some of you deal with it in one way, and some of you deal with it in another way. But to see Tom and so many other survivors turning their grief into action really is inspiring, and I think it's the main thing that you can do in memory of whoever you lost. It takes incredible strength and courage, I know, and I just want to say how grateful I am for your leadership. You're making the world a better place, and hopefully we don't have to have that many more meetings like this one. I've worked for Everytown for a long time. I've met survivors across the country, and the number of survivors is just staggering. Every day you pick up the paper today and there's another shooting. Some are ones, some are twos, some are big ones. This year in the United States, 12,000 people will be murdered with illegal handguns, and 19,000 people will commit suicide with illegal handguns. 32,000, 33,000, some number along that line. And it just has to stop. No other developed country experiences losses in gun violence like we do here in America. Not even close. 35 people a day are murdered with guns. But for decades, too many politicians just ignored the problem. And now the reason was partly the power of the NRA, but it was also partly because, let's face it, a lot of politicians view this as a Black and Latino problem, and so they just look the other way. To me, it's just disgraceful what they do. Just think about this. Black men make up only 6% of the population, but they make up 52% of gun violence victims, more than half. There's a number of things wrong in our society, and we just have to do something about it. These murders don't usually make national headlines, but they are national tragedies, and we just can't accept them. In recent years, more politicians have begun waking up because the killings are happening in their communities, and in their churches, and in their malls, and in their movie theaters. Their constituents are losing children, and their voters are demanding action, and voters are electing candidates who are getting things done. If you don't want to be depressed, just think we really are making progress, but we have an enormous long ways to go. Getting things done is what Everytown for Gun Safety is all about, and that's what Tom and other leaders here in Aurora have done, and it's why I'm running for president, just to stop this nationwide madness. That's the only ways to describe it. It's just, I don't know, Tom, how you get up every day and remember Alex, but also have the courage to go out and try to make this world a better place. So thank you, and thank you everybody here. This issue is somewhat personal for me. As Tom mentioned, I've gone to an awful lot of eulogies, partially because of all the people killed on 9/11. But after that is 12 years as mayor, unfortunately, one of the things you have to do is you have to go and you have to comfort the families, and you have to talk about somebody who's deceased that you never met, and try to put yourself in the place of the parents. And that's just so hard to do, but Donald Trump seems to accept this violence and pain, and he and the NRA leaders say that there isn't anything we can do about it. And every time I go to another funeral, I think, oh my God, there has to be something we can do about it. I don't accept that kids being murdered at school is something that we should be used to. I don't accept that kids getting killed in the streets is something we should get used to. I didn't accept gun violence ripping apart our cities and communities every day, and I'm going to do everything I can to change the administration in Washington and fight back against this evil. It's not the only problem this country has, but it's certainly one that we can focus on today. When I started working on gun violence some 15 years ago, neither party, neither the Republicans or the Democrats, were particularly interested in the issue. In fact, some Democrats voted against the Brady background check bill back in the 1990s, and some even voted to give blanket immunity to the gun industry, something no other industry in the United States has. That really was shameful, and as president, I will work to repeal it. When I was mayor of New York City, I co-founded the National Coalition of Mayors Against Illegal Guns that we talked about before. We enlisted more than 1,000 other mayors from red states and blue states. But even after Democrats won control of both Congress and the White House back in 2008, gun safety just was not a priority. And sadly, when we had the opportunity to do something about it, it just fell by the wayside. When I left City Hall in 2014, I didn't walk away from the fight, though. I got even more involved because it seemed to me I had more time, and why not devote my life to the same thing that I had when I was mayor. I helped found Everytown and helped build it into a counterweight to the NRA. And today, Everytown and Moms Demand Action have an army of 6 million supporters. Think about that, 6 million supporters, and they are shaking up politics across the country. Since last year, 20 states have passed significant new gun laws, including 9 signed by Republican governors. So if you just go and knock on the door in your red shirts, or you write letters, or you pick up the phone and you call, you are making a difference. Elected officials are responsive. They've just got to hear enough people say, this is what I want, and this is the reason I'm going to vote for you or not vote for you, and you will get the action that you're demanding. It took 19 members of Congress for us who were A-rated by the NRA for us to support candidates to run against them. The 19 were replaced by people who understood that we just cannot continue to kill our young people, and that we have to do something, and that they are responsible. The gun safety champions we helped elect flipped control of the House to the Democrats, and I'm happy to say that under Nancy Pelosi's leadership, one of the first things the new House did was to pass a strong background check bill. But unfortunately, we have a president who bows down to the extremists who run the NRA and cannot tolerate that. I believe we need a president who has a track record of taking on the NRA and winning. And you say, why do I think I can do it? Because I've done it. So today I just want to touch on a few things, a few of the actions that I've taken to do something about this national emergency rather than just talk about it. I emphasize do something because my candidacy is about getting things done. There's just too much talk about gun violence. The movement that we created gets things done. I've given my time to organize and reorganize and pull together resources from local groups across the country and defeat Republicans who stand in the way. And I can tell you, I am just getting started no matter what happens in the next election. For me, leadership isn't about shaking your fist at the world or putting ideas up on a website. It's about bringing people together to solve problems and get results. And that's what I want to do as president. To begin with, if I'm lucky enough to get elected, we're going to overhaul the background check system to make it much more effective. No one should be able to buy a gun without passing a complete background check, and we're going to get that done. We'll also close loopholes and gaps in the systems, like the one allowing unmarried domestic abusers to possess guns, and the one allowing sales to go through if a background check takes longer than 3 business days, and the one preventing law enforcement from identifying felons and others who own guns illegally. We'll also be smarter about who can buy guns. For instance, 18 to 20-year-olds are 4 times as likely to commit a homicide compared to older Americans. The suicide rate among teens has increased exponentially over the past decade. And in most states, the legal age for purchasing a handgun from a private seller is still only 18. Think about it. If you have to be 21 to buy a beer, You ought to be 21 at least to buy a handgun or any form of semi-automatic firearm. We'll also work to adopt a 48-hour waiting period for every purchase. That is really important in preventing suicides. And we'll adopt a red flag law at the federal level, like the one Tom helped pass right here in Colorado. One of the biggest problems with existing background check systems has nothing to do with the database. It contains a lot of useful information about criminal history, but most of it can't be used actually to deny a purchase. And we're going to change that by requiring buyers to obtain a permit before they purchase a gun. Because just having a background check isn't enough. The question is, even no matter what the background check says, can you stop them from getting a gun when they're a minor, when they have a criminal record, or when they have psychiatric problems? This permit will allow authorities to screen applicants for dangerous behavior. And I just think about you and I in our conversation before about your son 4 months ago being shot and killed. That includes arrests for violence, like assault and domestic violence incidents, and for arrests for reckless behavior, like driving while intoxicated. Now, I know critics will say that Americans shouldn't need a permit to exercise their constitutional rights, but voting is a constitutional right, and we require people to register to protect the rights of all citizens, and this is exactly the same idea, because a criminal with a gun can destroy our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Permits have worked very well in the 11 states that have adopted them, including New York, I'm happy to say, and it's time to make the law of the land take that up. As president, I will attack gun violence from every angle. I will work with Congress to reinstate the ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, to ban 3D printing of guns, and to require firearms to be safely secured. I'll work to give the Consumer Product Safety Commission the authority to adopt minimum gun safety standards, and I'll declare gun violence to be a national public health emergency, which will increase the funding available for research. I'll also increase funding for the ATF to conduct enforcement and for community-based violence intervention programs. I'll ban guns at all schools and colleges. I'll work with business leaders to encourage responsible sales practices and pressure the gun industry to change. And I'll do everything in my power to save lives. Now, my agenda is not some Johnny-come-lately list of borrowed ideas. This is part of my life's work, and I'm just telling you, I will get this done, whether I get elected or not. I have proven in New York that gun safety laws can be passed and that they can be enforced. It takes focus. It takes facts. It takes determination. It takes never backing down. I know Tom Sullivan isn't backing down. I know all of you are not backing down. And I promise you, I will never back down from this fight. That's the kind of president that this country needs and that you deserve. Let's face it, it's going to be a very difficult time to reverse 4 years of cruelty and incompetence. The mind-boggling we have to stop pulling people apart. We have to bring people together. We need a president who represents everybody, not one particular political party. That's why I'm running, and that's the kind of president I will be. We just have to do something about this, folks. We just cannot keep killing each other and killing our children and killing our grandchildren and killing our parents and loved ones and spouses. It's time to say, enough is enough. We're just not going to put up with it anymore. Thank you very much.
Just for a moment while we restage. My name is Debbie Ware. I am a national gun violence prevention advocate. I spent the last 2 years managing Moms Demand Action and Students Demand Action with Everytown for gun safety, and I'm now with the campaign getting the word out there. Number one, I want to say we have volunteers here and survivors every single day that are out in the communities and working together got major legislation passed in Colorado. And Tom, I want us to all say your son's name, Alex, out loud, because sometimes we hear statistics And we forget that these are families, and these are people, and these are children. So if we could just take a moment and say Alex's name out loud.
Alex.
We can never forget the victims and the survivors. Also, I'm a survivor of gun violence. My dad took his life with a gun 10 years ago. He was a farmer, he was a Vietnam vet, and I spent 15 years at MAD, and what MAD really taught me is that when people work together, change happens. And so many of these tragedies are 100% preventable every single time. And so I feel like we are making progress, but we have to have a president, a leader that makes this a #1 priority and not say words but not do anything about it. So thank you, Mike, for everything that you've done on this issue. So I'm gonna ask a few questions of Tom and Mike, and Tom, I'm gonna start with you. Can you tell us about your journey to state rep, and how did your work with the Everytown Survivor Network prepare you to be elected for office?
I ran I had to run twice, so we don't give up. So that's one of the things that I learned by working with moms and with Everytown is that you never give up. We are on the right path. We are making change. So I ran for a Senate seat, lost that, but then 2 years later was able to win the House seat. And it was, organization. It was expanding the network, talking to more people, just again showing up. Being engaged and returning time after time after time to people's front doors and to their meeting places and their workplaces and meeting them wherever they wanted to meet, because that's really what it takes, is telling our story, because there really is more that we agree with than divides us, and we just have to get to that point and not be afraid to have that conversation.
Thank you. Mike, when you look at polling, it's clear that the majority of Americans support common sense reforms like background checks. So why, from your long experience, was this issue politically difficult for so long? And what did DC lawmakers tell you back then when they sat down with you as a mayor? And what do they say now?
Well, 80 to 90% of the public, when you survey them, even if they are NRA members and own guns, 80 to 90% say we should have background checks. I think one of the problems is we talk about gun control rather than background checks, and so people hear something different than that question was asked. Number two, I think I'm in favor of background checks. But I've got to go to the baseball game today, I've got to go to work, I've got to do this. It's the small handful of people that the NRA gins up, and they go out there every day and ring the doorbell and write letters and pound the pavement and follow people screaming at them. And if the people who wanted to get legislation enacted to stop this carnage would do exactly that, you'd get it done much quicker. And I think, in fact, that is, to some extent, what the moms do. That red shirt is scary. You have a bunch of women in red shirts coming at you, and you say, uh-oh, I got a problem here. Houston, what do I do next?
Yeah, and I always like to say moms as mothers and others, because I see some gentlemen with some red shirts on today, too. So thank you for all that you do. Tom, I'm sure you own a couple of red shirts.
I have red ones, I have white ones, I have blue ones. We had, I think, some black ones. I've got a whole bunch of them.
I only have red and orange.
I have orange. I have orange as well. Yes.
Tom, you've been on both sides. As a volunteer, you came calling on lawmakers. Now, as a lawmaker yourself, you see how the sausage gets made. What are some secrets you've learned that volunteers need to know and need to continue to do?
It's not that complicated. It's just be present. It's continue to be there. I mean, and that's one of the things when you need to show up at their local town halls. You need to be those two chairs that are sitting in the front so that when that legislator or that senator comes in, they know, okay, here's someone who wants to talk, about gun violence prevention. Because the other groups have that. The veterans are there, the teachers are there, the small business owners are there. We need to join them and make sure that we're on the front lines of having the discussion and then letting them know that if they have any questions about it, we're their go-to people. We're the ones that they come to for the answers, and let them know that we will be there for them when they support us. We also need to let them know, you don't support us, we're coming for your jobs. That's what I did. They didn't want to talk to me, I took their job. That's what you all can do.
Mike, you said in your remarks it wasn't always the case that Democrats were united on gun safety. How have we turned a corner, and how do we make sure that Democrats won't walk away from this issue again?
Well, I don't want Democrats to walk away. I don't want Republicans to walk away from this. This should not be a partisan issue. What is partisan about stopping carnage? The Democrats talked about if they were in power, they would do something. Okay, at least in the House now, they're in power, and Nancy Pelosi delivered. She did pass a bill. Unfortunately, the Senate didn't go along, and the president said he would not go along. But we've just got to hold their feet to the fire, and the reason that I supported 24 candidates for the House, all of whom were good on climate and good on guns, and they turned out to be all Democrats. I would have supported a couple Republicans if they were good on those two things, but they weren't. And out of the 24, 21 won, and they all won by a little bit, so I think we had a real say and impact in terms of getting them elected. That flipped the House, and then Pelosi became the Speaker, and then they could pass some legislation. Now, if the Republicans want to keep control of the Senate, if I were them, I'd take a look at this group right here and say, none of these people are particularly partisan. They want something, and I better deliver it for them. And I think we need a president who's going to stand up and provide leadership in both the House and the Senate, and pull people together, pull this country together, and get this legislation passed so we can get on. Who would have thought that the controversial thing is just to stop people from getting massacred? I mean, what did I miss here?
You know, I think after Parkland happened, many of us felt like this is a real tipping point. But sometimes people forget and get on with their lives. Tom, I just want to say to you as a bereaved father, and Mike said this earlier, how you even get up out of the bed every day and put one foot in front of the other. And what's so encouraging is to see for survivors that we can make a difference, right? And so what else do you think it will take to tip that point even more, and that we will get some of this legislation passed?
Through the grief process. Once they get through that and get their feet underneath of them and their voices, in them, there's more of them, and they're certainly smarter than me. They have better plans, than I do, because there is an answer to this out there. We're just waiting for that person to finally step up. So that's why, I get up every day. That's why I do this, to let people know that there is a path to this, and we can make this happen.
Mike, we've seen some business leaders really come out strongly on this issue, finally. Ed Stack, for example, with Dick's Sporting Goods. How can business leaders continue to make a difference on this issue?
Well, what Ed Stack did at Dick's Sporting Goods is he stopped selling guns. Walmart has been very aggressive in stop selling most kinds of weapons, and I think they may even stop selling ammunition. There are other companies starting to follow them. If you take away the opportunity to buy stuff, make it more difficult, it sends a message, and people buy less of it and use it. But, corporations have obligations as well, not just to make money. They've got to be good corporate citizens. And I can't think of any ways. CVS is another one. They took out cigarettes. Not selling cigarettes, particularly in the healthcare business, is a smart thing to do. They have an obligation to do that. And I think some of these well-run companies where the CEO and the chairman of the board have the courage to stand up and take some grief from the analysts and from the pundits who know everything but are afraid to do anything, you can really make some progress, and you're starting to see more of that.
In closing, and then we'll open it up to the audience for questions. Tom, what's one easy way we can demonstrate our power right here, right now?
Sign up with your local moms, find out when their next meeting is, and make sure that you go. There's a great program that they have. We've talked about the safe storage. They have a great program called Be Smart. Contact them, have that brought to your school, to your PTA, to your church group. Find out, because we know that 3 out of every 4 school shootings are perpetrated by a 14-year-old who has found an unlocked, loaded firearm that was owned by a parent or another family member. If we can just get mom and dad and Uncle Bob to lock something up before they take off to work in the morning, we can reduce that number. Those are some key things that we can do, and we can do that today.
Thank you for your courage so much in honor of Alex. Thank you. And we will open it now for questions from the audience.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Maisha Fields, and I want to thank you for opening up the ceremony with giving light to the victims who have been lost. And so with that, I'd like just to mention my brother's name and his fiance, Javad Marshall Fields and Vivian Wolf, who were murdered on June 20th of 2004. And also my nephew, Darrell Bell, and they're here today with us as well. My question, as it relates to your national policy, is 2 parts. One, do you support mandating that all gun owners have insurance, to the same point of car insurance? So if you own a weapon of mass destruction or individual destruction, that you would be required to own insurance. And so if a crime is committed, there were to be insurance policy that would be paid out to victims. And then the second part of that is, do you have a plan in part for the survivors? As a survivor, I was, and my family we were able to tap into victim resources, but very recently we learned that those victims' resources are not available with true equity. And that there is some discrimination based on the crime that is committed and how a victim is murdered. And so do you have a plan in part for victims and recovery thereafter?
Tom, let me talk about the insurance, and you can talk about the support, maybe better than I can. I don't know the insurance companies would write an insurance policy like that. They would want to know that the person was responsible and we're not going to stop that person from buying a gun, and the insurance company says, well, then we're not going to insure them. And I think you'd have it's not a it's a good idea, incidentally. I hadn't thought about it. But I think in a practical sense, the insurance industry would probably not want to participate. You want to talk about?
Yeah, support is and I do get that. It's hard sometimes for people to reach out to let others know that they are struggling with a situation like that. There are a lot of they're hard to find. And as you say, a lot of those are in constant need of funding. On the statewide level, we're trying to make sure that we fund that type of stuff. One of the bills that I passed was something to on mental health parity, make it in line with our regular health, so that you can help people, who have a mental illness or are having a rough day, and that would be those types of things you should be able to get. That kind of help. But as we've had to do over the ages, a lot of times we have to, reach out to our faith-based community for the help that we need in getting through the day, and they have, risen up to help us with that. But it's a continuing struggle.
And also, like Bloomberg Philanthropies and lots of other organizations fund Everytown, fund moms. So there is private money going in. It's just not government money going in. But there's private money going in to try to do something about this and provide support services, which the moms do, as well as trying to get guns out of the hands of people that shouldn't have them.
Another question?
Thank you. My name is David Croft, and I'm a retired Cherry Creek School teacher from Prairie Middle School, which is about a mile from here. And during the Aurora, when the Aurora shooting happened, we had quite a few victims at our school. And Michael White is a close friend of mine. He was a victim, but he lived. And I have, in the last year, started a foundation called Teachers Rising Up. This foundation is speaking directly to you, ma'am. We will raise money in order to take care of any kind of school violence, from school shootings, suicide, bullying, cyberbullying, attempted suicide. I've spoken with Tom a couple weeks ago, and he was so wonderful to listen. I am, at this point, we are a grassroots foundation. We are going to be helping victims get back on their feet. And when I say this, is the question I have for you, Mayor, is where is your heart? Where is your heart when it comes to victims who are still walking with such a heavy load? Our Teachers Rising Up will ultimately pay for counseling for victims across the country. This is a national campaign that I started a year ago, and it's now up and running as of September. So you, as a leader and president of the United States, you say that, but I believe it. I would like to know where your heart is when it comes to these victims.
Well, first thing that occurred to me is I can never put myself in the situation, hopefully never will have to or be able to, of having actually lost a loved one. So I can never really feel as much as almost all of you do. What I can do is look at it a little more cold, calculated way and say, what we can do for those who are deceased is to stop more people from getting killed. And so working hard, trying to raise the money and then have the right people to implement programs all across this country, whether it's lobbying Congress, whether it's picketing elected officials, whether it's going to stores and convincing them to not sell, whether it's trying to support the police department who, if the police feel that the public's not behind them, they're just not going to have their heart in it as much as they need to really stop this carnage. In the end, they're the ones that we look to keep us safe. I don't know how else to answer that. It is my number one, or that's not fair, one of my 2 or 3 number ones. Get rid of Trump, climate change, guns, and then public education. And to me, if you could do something on all of those, you'd go a heck of a long ways down the road.
I think we have time for one more question, maybe 2. One, go ahead, sir. Uh-huh. Oh.
We'll do both the questions
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah.
A question for you, Mike. As you pointed out, many gun owners, but the narrative out there tends to be the same one because the gun lobby has really been winning the battle of the narrative out there. They get their message out very effectively, as you pointed out. And as a result, many of us in this movement are considered gun grabbers like you would be. So I guess my question would be, I don't consider myself anti-gun. That's the narrative. I'm anti-gun violence. But what would you do? What would be your plan for reaching out to those responsible gun owners? Because there's many out there. How would you reach out to those responsible gun owners and put them at ease?
Well, what you have to do is you have to say, number one, if you have a gun and you have a child at home, you have a special responsibility. And if every one of us should think back when you were a young kid. Didn't you look in your parents' closet up top on the shelf to see what was there, or in your mother's pocketbook or something? I mean, all kids do that sort of thing. I can only tell you what we did in New York City. We cut the murder rate in half while I was in office. We cut the people that are incarcerated in half. We did a whole bunch of things that made New York City safer, so that today there's almost no murders in New York City. We have 1,000 murders instead of 2,800. So you can do something about it. And I think you can do it across the country. You know, people say you can't do anything. That's not true. We are making progress. There are more red flag laws being passed and background check laws being passed. And the polls keep saying that I'm going to go and maybe call the NRA and say, stop this craziness. And incidentally, the NRA is a shell of what it was a year ago. And part of that is because we discovered that they were selling insurance, which is illegal. And then when we went to the feds, they went and their funding source disappeared, and they had all these fights internally. So the NRA is not this organization that is always going to beat you. We can beat them. We just got to focus on it and not let up.
And we did commit to one more question, sir, right there. Right here.
I'm here because of Tom. Tom, good to see you. Thank you for inviting me. Tom and I have had this discussion over a cigar or two about, it seems like there's gun laws, but when a person gets turned down, nothing ever happens to them. You don't hear about some guy that went in and lied on an application, and he's turned down. Obviously, he can't buy the gun, which is good, but why, and Tom and I have had this discussion, why isn't there a knock on his door 2 days later from somebody in the police going, sir, you lied, it's a felony? And Tom, you've indicated, I believe, that it's local resources, that the sheriffs don't have the money. What can we do about that?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, I mean, and we've had to, we're going to continue to work on it. We have, a background check law here in the state of Colorado, and that's, the lie and try, type of a situation. We're going to have to, right now it's just a misdemeanor if you lie and try. We're going to have to, move that up to a felony. And what will be so great is when we get background checks passed nationwide, okay? So that will bring in federal resources. That will bring in the FBI. You can normally, take care of, Andy Mayberry and have him look the other way, but you don't get the FBI guys don't look the other way when someone's not following the law. So that's what we're going to need, and that's why it's so important that we have somebody like Mike in the White House so that we can get a background check, done nationwide, and we can start closing up those loopholes.
Thank you all for everything you do, and I wish we never had to have these meetings, but let's just make sure we don't have too many more.
And thank you.